are especially grateful to the devoted friends and students of Lillian Fine who so generously contributed to the endowment. Many of you are here today to pay tribute to Lillian Fine. Here is a little bit of background about Lillian Fine. She was born in Milford, Mass., a small town near Boston. In the 1930s, she came to New York to get her master's in education at Columbia Teachers College. And along with my father, the former education editor of the New York Times, Benjamin Fine, and their 4 daughters, they moved to Rockville Center in the 1950s. That's in Long Island. In 1971, my parents moved to Key Biscayne. Lillian Fine treasured books. She came to the Miami Book Fair every year, and she often volunteered to work here. She shared her passion for literature with her students, the adults she taught at Miami-Dade College and at the Institute for Retired Professionals before giving private classes on her own. Together, they explored a wide spectrum of acclaimed authors such as Henry James, Kafka, Proust, Nabokov, Thomas Mann, Arthur Miller, and James Joyce. She also introduced her students to works by writers of different nationalities and ethnic groups. My mother opened the doors for many, and that is why every year we continue to celebrate her spirit and keep her memory alive. A group of her students has established the Lillian Fine Study Group that still gathers to discuss literature, thus perpetuating her legacy. My mother would have been thrilled with today's choice of Azar Nafisi, who shares her love of literature and her love of books. The philosopher Kenneth Burke wrote of, quote, literature as equipment for living. And that concept applies very much to Nafisi's way of thinking. In her latest book, The Republic of Imagination, America in 3 Books, Nafisi intertwines literary discussions of Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Sinclair Lewis, Babbitt, Carson McCullers' The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, and works by James Baldwin. She intertwines them with her own and a close friend's personal experiences in revolutionary Iran in 1979. She also talks about her experiences coming to America. Throughout her study, she exalts the return of imagination and the transformative power of fiction. She feels that there is an assault on literature in contemporary America. A society that dismisses its literature risks losing its freedom, she warns. She contrasts America's indifference to books with the liberating power of literature in the face of tyranny. This was depicted vividly in Nafisi's well-known text, Reading Lolita in Tehran, written in 2003. In the midst of sirens and bombs, we turned to books because we wanted to make sense of this senseless brutality, she writes. Literature became a form of resistance, a means of affirming one's humanity. In The Republic of Imagination, Azar Nafisi makes a passionate plea for fiction and for reading. Books matter, she says. They open up a window into a more meaningful life. They enable us to tolerate complexity and nuance, and to empathize with people whose lives and conditions are utterly different from our own. Azar Nafisi makes the case for the value of teaching and studying the humanities. We are privileged today to have with us this exceptional author. Let us welcome her.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Fine. I think that I'm allowed to be emotional, although if Ed Hirsch is here, I don't dare to become sentimental. I would like to thank everyone, especially my friend and poet, Tom Healy, and everyone else who's here for giving me the pleasure and the privilege of sharing what means so much to me. And I thought that before beginning to share those thoughts and ideas, I want to honor two groups. Yesterday I was in such a hurry to actually listen to others. This is the kind of a place you come. Everybody asks me, what is the Republic of Imagination? And I can tell them, this is the Republic of Imagination. You know, you have people, communities, authors, readers, publishers. This is the only time we are at peace with our publishers. You know, publishers, readers, you know, booksellers, all of us gather together, and all of us, the most important thing is with acts of imagination and ideas, is that you transcend the boundaries that reality puts in front of you, and you transcend the boundaries of nationality, religion, ethnicity, language, race, and gender. You go to these booths, these amazingly colorful booths, and you know, one of the things about books and about book fairs or bookstores or libraries is how sensual they are. You know, I sometimes feel, you know, like a naughty child just going to a bookstore and feel the different books. You know, each cover has its own story. And one of the most intimate and yet public acts is the act of writing and reading. And I always say that, you know, I hate to use this word that is used by every celebrity, and I don't even know what celebrity means, but you know, I feel blessed. The fact that through the love of books, I connect with strangers that become immediately intimate strangers. You know, books become like your children. You're so worried about them. You think, oh my God, you know, what's going to happen to this baby, especially now? Can I pay for her education? You know, will there be any public schools by the time this child comes into the world? Am I taking enough vitamins, you know, and things like that? And then you go through the labor pains, and there's so much sorrow and anxiety and joy and ecstasy, and the child comes into the world. And the amazing thing about children is not how you take them to places, but the places they take you, and the amazing strangers they bring to your house. So I feel so much at home here, and I want to thank you. And so I thought that I will begin this in honor of two groups. I didn't get a chance, because of all the clashes, to listen to many of my favorite authors and poets, but I did get a chance to listen to one of my most favorite of all poets in this country, and that was Ed Hirsch. And then there is Tom, and you know, I remember the poets, and so I wanted to read something in appreciation of them, to respond to those people who think poetry is irrelevant to us. This is by a guy whom you might know, this quote. His first name is Salman. There you go. You know, to those people who tell us, well, books are irrelevant, I mean, what do they do? I say, if books were irrelevant, why do you want to kill an author? If books are irrelevant in a democracy, why do you ban them? There must be something absolutely relevant to them that certain people, certain mindsets cannot tolerate. And so a book that is the sort of representative of what it means to be an American, like Huckleberry Finn, has been banned since its birth. So here is to the poets. A poet's work is to name the unnameable, to point at frauds, to take sides, to start arguments, shape the world, and stop it from going to sleep. And I think that that should be our homage to the poets. The next homage is to the readers. And I think that, one writer, Vladimir Nabokov, used to say, readers are born free, and they ought to remain free. Because, we constantly talk about the writers and their rights and, their censorship. But I constantly think of millions, billions of readers. And what about their right to choose what they want to read, and where they want to read it, and who they want to read it? We neglect that aspect of it because books can become very fragile. They're like hothouse flowers, like that story, never-ending story. Books need to be given new names by readers from different parts of the world, from different cultures, from different perspectives, in order for them to thrive and to live. And so I decided to read, this is actually a quote from a writer who understands the dangers of both writing and reading, who is in this room today, and whose voice literally, both in books, and I discovered yesterday at the Baldwin panel that she has just a gorgeous voice as well. Edwidge, I'm talking about you. I love embarrassing people like you. I'm going to read from what she says about writing and reading, and she's under the influence of Albert Camus. Create dangerously for people who read dangerously, knowing in part that no matter how trivial your words may seem, someday, somewhere, someone may risk his or her life to read it. People think that the act of writers and poets and artists and musicians, has nothing to do with danger. Nothing, as Ed Hirsch yesterday reminded us again, is more dangerous than ideas and imagination, because you have to lay your soul and your body bare. And any reader who, I always think of Alice in Wonderland, who has the alternative eye of imagination, who sees the white rabbit and just runs after that white rabbit without asking a question, without, like some of our academics today or politicians, you cannot tell these days academics from politicians at times, imposing their theories, imposing their ideologies on the book, on the text, taking the life out of it, because a book, like a life experience, is something completely new, and it should be experienced. Even if you dislike it, that connection is very personal. And so the fact is that, like Alice, the great readers have to just jump down that hole. Of course, Alice is British, so she's very polite. I noticed that about her. If it was an American, she would just jump down the hole, maybe sing, I don't know what kind of a song. But this is Alice. She's a very polite lady. As she goes down the hole, she's putting the cups on the shelves and, not letting anything drop. But anyway, that's the British for you. So anyway, the whole point that I'm trying to make is that we are told today in this society that everything has become so ideological, so politically correct, nobody really expresses themselves, and the whole idea of art and literature, the whole idea of ideas is the fact, and the whole idea of a university of knowledge, as Baldwin reminds us. Baldwin says, I'm a preacher's son. And let me remind you that about that apple from the tree of knowledge. He's very much against innocence. And like J.D. Salinger, who wants to keep children innocent and protected from the world, Baldwin talks of innocence as a crime. Because not to know, not to bite the apple, would not make you human. The first act of becoming human was biting from the tree of knowledge that now some of our leaders so cavalierly are dismissing. Why do we need imaginative knowledge? For heaven's sake, imaginative knowledge is not something you have today and tomorrow you discard of because now you have an iPhone. You cannot have an iPhone, as the wonderful Walter Isaacson constantly reminds us, you cannot have an iPhone without imagination. And you cannot have an iPhone without a democratic society whose aim is not just money, whose aim is telling you, you want to go into your garage and experiment, some of us are behind you. Go and do it. The whole idea of education in a society like this is based on the fact that every individual has the right to life and liberty and pursuit of happiness. Therefore, as those founders, whom certain groups in our policymakers have now sort of confiscated what it means to be a founder, what it means to be a constitution, and apparently all this revolution against the British and the Civil War and the civil rights was so that we will hold sacred the Second Amendment, But, that is a different story. And I'm in the state of Florida, so I better watch it, But, and a governor whom I quote in this book for his amazingly wise sayings on education. But anyway, to make this long story short, and Tom, you're the boss here, so tell me when, I always say it in my talks that you're a Democrat until you get the podium. So, this is very dangerous right now. Okay, now, I want to get to part of my talk that is important to me because the way the story behind this book, which took almost 11 years to write it, my editor keeps reminding me that as I was finishing reading Lolita in Tehran, I was thinking of this book. And at the end of that book, one of the questions that I bring is from Saul Bellow, because Bellow was very worried, not just about the brutalities in Eastern European countries or in fascist countries, but what will happen to democracies. And the question that he posed was, those who survived the ordeal of Holocaust, how will they survive the ordeal of freedom? And when you come from a society, brutality is very obvious. In those societies, you know where you stand. And they all act the same. Tyrants are not very imaginative, And that is why they're so scared of the poet. Because there is that, tyrants want to reinvent the citizens in their own image and impose their voice on everyone. Poets reimagine everyone and give back the voice to everyone. And that multivocality, that great novels and great poetry and great art brings to us is most dangerous to tyrants. So in the Islamic Republic, the first thing they did was target individual rights and human rights. And the first victims became women, minorities, and culture. The first attack on universities was not because the engineers were really against the state. Those engineers who were in jail were the ones who were politically against the state. the first thing they did was attack humanities. And the first thing they're still doing is attack humanities. They said that our great leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, he said that it is through humanities that the West insinuates itself into the minds of our young people. And so in those countries, reading banned books, becoming a human being by refusing to look the way these people want you to look. It is not about whether Islam is good or bad. It is about the fact that every person, every woman has the right to choose how she wants to connect to God or not connect to God. And every woman has the right to dress and act and be master or mistress of her own, life. That is what is at stake, freedom of choice, the same way that Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Harriet Beecher Stowe and Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth, the same way they were fighting and people were saying Bible says that a woman's place is at home, they were saying the same thing about slavery. So that is what the fight is all about, not about a religion. It is the abuse of a religion and taking it and turning it into an instrument of the state where the religion loses actually its spiritual power. We see it here. People try to do the same thing here in this country. Okay, so what I'm trying to say then is that the poets and the writers and the artists and the journalists became the first targets. They were the ones who went to jail. Some of them were killed. Some of them are still in jail and being killed. So the point with this is that in Iran, we know that books are objects for which people kill and are killed. So everything is sort of very, very obviously drawn, the lines. But in America, and that was a question, and that is what I start this new book with, the question that a young man at the Elliott Bay bookstores in Seattle, he was in the queue for an autograph, and he was from Iran, and he told me, it is all useless. He said, these people, meaning the American people, they're not like us, who would Xerox hundreds of pages of Madame Bovary or Huckleberry Finn. These people don't care about such things. And that question stayed in my mind. And it stayed in my mind because some of my American, you go on book tours and some Americans would ask you the same question, that didn't you guys or people in Eastern Europe need literature because of the fact that, it was banned, it was a repressive country, as if because we have access to literature, because we can just go around the corner and buy it, we shouldn't buy it. What good is a book if you're free to buy it? I mean, don't be bloody ridiculous, honestly. Okay, you guys want to go to jail to love books? That can be arranged, but, But anyway, the point that I was trying to make is that the question that came to me and the question that I wanted to pose to you, I feel that this is not the time for, reading is an act, but I think that we readers and writers should get together and create communities in our communities in order to defend our turf. So I'm not just saying this to promote this book. And I always say don't buy the book, but buy the cover. No, not buy the cover, steal the cover. Peter Sis, another amazing man. Buy Peter Sis's books, actually, even better. I don't know if you have it in the festival. He's an amazing man. Okay, so going back to what I wanted to say was that the question was, can a democracy exist without a democratic education, without a democratic imagination? This was the question that I had to put to myself. And the reason for it was partly because what I was seeing in this country, the way the education is being standardized. Now, we all want our students to be disciplined and read and take things seriously, but the most difficult thing is, in fact, reading philosophy and poetry and the obstacles that they put in front of your eyes, it is not just the information that Google provides you with. It is what you do when you Google Ed Hirsch or Tom Healy and the poem comes, then you have to use your mind. You know, and if our students in colleges and universities are not free to use their minds, if education becomes private so that only a few people can afford to send their children to Stuyvesant or to the school even our president's children goes to, Sitwell's Friends, if we do that, then how can we have citizens who are responsible? Because, you know, they say that it is not relevant that, you know, these people live in ivory towers. Theoreticians and the Congress might live in the ivory tower, not those people who have to pay $40,000 a year in order for their child to go to school. Not those whose universities that now get big money from corporations, have presidents like CEOs, and get money from Qatar or Saudi Arabia. That is not what these founders wanted. I had to read American history in order to understand American reality. And I discovered that even that soldier, the first president, who along with Benjamin Franklin said that we as public servants should not be paid because money corrupts, also wanted to have a national university at the Capitol, and he, along with Madison, with Adams, with Jefferson, wanted to have public schools, public education. And what he said was that the basis of public happiness is an education founded on literature and science. Now we have STEM. Again, read Walter Isaacson. Why is science segregated from humanities? Some of the greatest scientists, he talks about Einstein, and then he talks about Steve Jobs. Some of the greatest scientists, they were musicians, they were philosophers, they knew literature. Einstein talks about the fact that knowledge, meaning scientific knowledge, is limited, but imagination encircles the world. Steve Jobs, when he gives up university, there was no PayPal person to pay him, you know, to drop college, you know. But he then goes and audits in calligraphy, the most useless of all, even more useless than literature today. And he said that out of calligraphy, he got the logo for Apple. Don't think that this country will produce Steve Jobs or Bill Gates, who should have just kept to, you know, health and not entered what he doesn't know anything about, which is humanities. You know, the whole point is that you won't produce these people if you do not have an all-rounded education. And you won't produce good citizens, because what does it mean to be an irresponsible individual? The first thing is to make choices and be responsible for your choice. How can you be responsible for your choice if, as the state of New York now, the regions have decided, and the SUNY, they have decided that American history and global history is not necessary. Instead, the students can take a tech course. How could you not know what America is and its history and its principles and its values, and go and talk with these bloody Iranians about nukes? How could you know what to say to Iranians or to the Syrians or to all these people that you are constantly talking about and having drinks with in, you know, hidden, never mind. Anyway, the whole point about it is that how can you do that if you don't know where these cultures come from? Students come to me during my talks and they tell me that we are encouraged to go and learn Arabic and Persian because the State Department would hire us for translation. I tell them, don't you ever learn any language, just to be hired. You go and learn Arabic and Persian because you are in love with another civilization, for heaven's sake. Because you want to know. Because you're dying to know about this amazing epic poet called Ferdowsi, who lived 1,000 years ago in Iran, and the women in those epic poets were far more. 5 minutes? You see, Tom, you're being very generous. She is the real boss back there. Okay, I'll wrap up soon. I'll wrap up in 10 minutes instead of 5. I'm not looking at you. Okay, I'll finish soon. I'm sorry. It's not my fault, really. I was sitting here for half an hour. Okay, now, the whole point that I want to make, and I will make it quickly, is that what I decided to do then was, there were two things happened to me that I decided to do something about it. One was that in December 2008, I became an American. And when you choose to, thank you. We'll see, might want to kick me out. And the reason I became an American was that when you love a place, when you want to call it home, you don't just praise it and say how great we are, you start complaining. Because you want your home to be best. If you only are a passerby in Miami, you don't care. You know, it's either the greatest city in the world or not, but you pass by. But if you live in Miami, you're concerned. Every little detail, you're concerned. And I was complaining so much that I felt, okay, this is the time to become an American, or maybe I'm already an American and I don't know it, you know. So that was one thing, and I had to learn what America was. And the only place I could go, as in the case of Iran, was to its literature. And so I will end by just giving you an outline of what I felt about it, and then, you know, hopefully we'll talk about it later. The point about it was that I went back to my childhood. Since I was a small child, since I became conscious of who I am, my father would read me stories. And he was very democratic in reading the stories. He would start with the great heroes and heroines and mythology of Iran, and then the next day we would go to Italy with Pinocchio. The next day we go to France with Little Prince. The next day we go to Denmark with Little Match Girl. The next day we come to America with The Wizard of Oz. Actually, that was the first book that I learned from my tutor, my English tutor. And the other thing about America that I learned, that imaginary map of the world, I realized that I could stay in this small room of mine in the middle of Tehran, and the world will come to me. And the world will come to me through these books. And then about America, he would also take me to movies every week at the end of the week. And we would see Egyptian movies, Turkish movies, French movies, American movies. And with the American movies, the thing I remembered was the musicals. Because, you know, people are politely sitting and eating, and in the middle of eating, they all of a sudden get up and sing. You know, sing and dance and go up the poles and do weird things and then come back and sit and eat. And soon enough, Americans and Persians and others were doing the same thing. So anyway, it was that portable world, it was that America that I turned to. And I want to end by saying that it was very hard to choose these books, because I had, you know, we are all promiscuous when it comes to art. We have so many lovers, you know, and we are allowed to. And so what happened was that I had 24 books. I couldn't do it, so I had to condense it to books that would express my feelings. And the books that I chose were, I realized how the American novel, the American fiction, goes exactly against that crass materialism of American dream. There are two sides to this dream, two contradictory sides to this dream. And the fact that most of the important American heroes are outcasts and strangers, not just in Huck Finn, but even in the mystery tales, in that magnificent writer named Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett. They are quote-unquote little people, ordinary people, who do not want material success. They are, in Henry James's words, perfectly equipped failures. And I wanted to talk about them, beginning with Huck Finn, because I think Huck Finn is America's literary declaration of independence. And I felt that at the end of Huck Finn, people started moving out and going to other landscape, fictional landscape of America. So Babbitt becomes the anti-Huck, which is the standardization of thought. That is what is really threatening us today. Indifference, atrophy of feeling, sleeping consciousness, which is all the things that Bellow talks about. Okay, and then Carson McCullers, and then of course the great, the incomparable James Baldwin, who was not just a writer, not just an African-American writer, not just a gay African-American writer, not just an American writer, but a writer who speaks to all of us and who's so important today. And I think we should remember Baldwin. I don't have time to go into it. And I want to end by a quote from Mark Twain. Mark Twain gives a talk to what he calls the Mayflower tribe, the descendants of the Mayflower. Tongue-in-cheek as always, and magnificent as always. He tells them, you guys deprived me of my ancestors. He begins with the first Native American. He goes through Quakers, the witches, and he ends with the slaves. And he says, these were all my ancestors, for I am an exquisite, many-shaded mongrel. And that is the America I want to live in. A land of exquisite, many-shaded mongrels who, like that little kid named Huck Finn, decided that he will go with his heart against his deformed conscience, and he would save his friend Jim and risk going to hell, but doing the right thing. And that is the question I want to leave you with. How many of us today would rather go to hell, but listen to our heart and do the right thing? Thank you so much for your patience, and thank you.